That ambiguity forces us to examine the chassis data more closely. Even isolating for engine issues reveals a startling performance gap. Telemetry shows the AMR26 trailing by 3.5 seconds in qualifying. This deficit exists independently of the Honda power unit struggles. It suggests fundamental aerodynamic or correlation problems within the chassis itself. Adrian Newey confirmed he had to redesign the entire car. The Honda engine simply did not fit as originally packaged. This forced compromise likely cascaded through every subsequent design decision. So how do we separate engine failure from chassis failure? The answer remains frustratingly unclear in this 2026 season. We cannot blame the power unit for everything we see. Yet the vibration issue dominates every technical discussion right now. Fernando Alonso letting go of the wheel was terrifying. That moment proved the flaw was dangerous, not just slow. But danger does not fully explain the lap time deficit. Something deeper is broken within this Aston Martin package. Reliability concerns compound his performance mystery significantly. Around the Australian GP, the situation reached critical mass. The team had only 2 working hybrid batteries remaining. There were 0 spares available at that point. Completing full race distances became a genuine threat. This shortage paralyzed development and testing efforts entirely. You cannot fix what you cannot run reliably. Each failure consumed precious resources and track time. Meanwhile, Paddock estimates on horsepower vary wildly between sources. Some cite 60 horses down on Red Bull's thermal output, others claim deficits exceeding 100 kilowatts against Mercedes. One outlet frames it as 90 horsepower exactly. These contradictions suggest nobody truly knows the real number. Honda's Shintaro Orihara offered only qualitative confirmation publicly. He stated their Barcelona performance was definitely poor. He deliberately avoided citing any specific metric. This official vagueness fuels the ongoing speculation endlessly. Without verified data, assessing true competitiveness becomes guesswork. The crisis exposes structural problems beyond mere engine tuning. Chassis correlation issues appear equally significant now. Blaming Honda alone flattens a complex narrative dangerously. The truth lies somewhere in this messy intersection. The Chinese Grand Prix provided the most visceral evidence of this mechanical failure. Fernando Alonso had to physically release the steering wheel mid-corner. This was not a driver error or a momentary lapse in concentration. It was an involuntary reaction to severe low-frequency vibration transmitted directly through the chassis. The Honda power unit was shaking the entire car with such violence that maintaining grip became impossible. Safety concerns immediately overshadowed all performance discussions after that lap. ESPN and Motorsport.com both subsequently framed the 2026 campaign explicitly as a crisis. They cited Alonso's physical struggle as the single most alarming incident of the year. When a 2-time world champion cannot hold on to the wheel, the problem transcends typical development growing pains. It becomes a fundamental question of whether the car is fit for purpose. This vibration issue has plagued the team since pre-season winter testing. Honda acknowledged the problem early but struggled to identify a root cause. Low-frequency oscillations are notoriously difficult to diagnose on track. They often stem from complex interactions between the internal combustion engine and the hybrid system. The new 2026 regulations demand MGU-K output jump from 120 kWh to 390 kWh. That massive increase in electrical deployment creates unprecedented stress points. Honda is managing this transition as a full works partner for the first time in this generation. The learning curve has proven brutally steep in real-world conditions. Engineers have been chasing ghosts in the data for months. Each attempted fix risks introducing new failure modes elsewhere. The AMR26 remains a moving target rather than a stable platform. Alonso's experience in China crystallized months of private frustration into public spectacle. Drivers rarely admit to losing control unless absolutely necessary. His willingness to highlight the danger speaks volumes about severity. This was not a complaint about balance or tire degradation. It was a warning about structural integrity under load. The vibration frequency matched resonant frequencies within the chassis tub itself. Damping solutions proved ineffective during initial track sessions. Hardware changes require manufacturing lead times unavailable mid-season. Software mitigation strategies sacrificed too much performance to be viable. The team found itself trapped between safety and competitiveness. Neither option offered a path forward without significant compromise. Every session became an exercise in risk management rather than optimization. So where does this leave the assessment of Aston Martin's actual pace? We know the car shakes violently enough to endanger drivers. We know the power unit lacks verified output figures against benchmarks. We know reliability shortages prevented normal development cycles. Yet we still lack a definitive horsepower number from Honda themselves. Shintaro Orihara confirmed poor performance qualitatively at Barcelona. He refused to quantify the deficit despite repeated questioning. Paddock whispers suggest gaps ranging from 60 to 136 horsepower. Such variance indicates guesswork rather than measured fact. Without official confirmation, every analysis remains partially speculative. The Zandvoort update promises improvement but delivers no guarantees. Reported gains span 20 to 50 horsepower depending on the source. No independent verification exists for any specific claim. Internal targets were met according to Honda's own statements. Whether those targets match competitive reality remains entirely unproven. The upcoming Dutch GP will provide our next concrete data point. Until then, uncertainty defines every discussion about this package. Picture this for a second. You're running a multi-million-dollar factory team, and your entire development program hinges on components that simply do not exist. Around the Australian Grand Prix, Aston Martin was down to its last 2 working hybrid batteries with absolutely no spares available. This was not a logistical oversight or a supply chain delay. It was a manufacturing crisis severe enough to threaten completing full race distances. When you have zero redundancy in a critical safety system, every lap becomes a gamble rather than a test. Development stalls completely because engineers cannot risk destroying their final usable parts. Data collection shrinks to conservative runs designed only to preserve hardware. You stop chasing performance and start praying for survival. That shortage paralyzed the team's ability to validate fixes for the vibration issues we just discussed. Without spare batteries, correlation work between simulation and reality became nearly impossible. The reliability crisis compounded the performance deficit in ways that pure horsepower numbers cannot capture. Paddock estimates on that horsepower deficit remain frustratingly inconsistent across sources. Some outlets cite a 60 horsepower thermal engine gap versus Red Bull as the baseline reference. Others claim energy recovery deficits reaching 100 kilowatts against Mercedes, translating to roughly 136 horsepower. A separate F1 Natix report frames the shortfall as exactly 90 horsepower in its headline analysis. These figures disagree by as much as 75 horses depending on which rumor you trust. Such wild variance suggests nobody outside Honda has verified telemetry data. We are essentially reading tea leaves from pit lane gossip rather than analyzing confirmed benchmarks. Honda's own Shintaro Orihara has publicly confirmed only qualitative underperformance since Barcelona testing began. He stated their performance was definitely poor compared to other manufacturers, but offered no numerical context whatsoever. This deliberate vagueness from the manufacturer itself keeps the speculation cycle spinning endlessly. Batteries ran out, testing stopped, progress froze. The Zandvoort update represents the next potential inflection point in this saga. Motorsport Week and MotorBiscuit report that Honda's revised power unit met internal targets ahead of its Dutch GP debut. Potential gains discussed across various outlets range from 20 to 50 horsepower depending on the source. No single number has been independently verified by multiple credible reports. Honda hitting internal targets does not necessarily mean closing the gap to rivals. Internal benchmarks might have been set conservatively given the reliability struggles earlier in 2026. Meeting a modest target feels like progress internally while still leaving the car uncompetitive externally. The upcoming race weekend will finally provide concrete timing data against direct competitors. Until those laps are completed and analyzed, every horsepower claim remains speculative at best. The team's stated goal for the second half of the season reflects this uncertainty realistically. They are targeting reliable midfield points finishes rather than podium contention. This represents a dramatic recalibration from preseason ambitions tied to Adrian Newey's arrival. Even if we magically erased every horsepower deficit tomorrow, Aston Martin would still face a massive structural problem. Telemetry data from multiple 2026 qualifying sessions shows the AMR26 trailing the fastest pace by approximately 3.5 seconds. That gap is simply too large to be explained by engine performance alone. The race explicitly rejected the simple blame, the engine narrative in their technical analysis. They argued chassis and correlation issues are equally significant factors in this competitiveness gap. When a car is 3.5 seconds off the ultimate pace, aerodynamics and mechanical grip have fundamentally failed regardless of what sits behind the driver. This brings us back to that opening line about how bad this season actually is. The answer involves far more than just a struggling Honda power unit. Adrian Newey confirmed he had to change the whole car because the Honda engine did not fit as originally packaged. That single admission reveals a cascading design compromise that likely compromised every downstream development decision. Newey's packaging struggles stem from the real-world characteristics of the Honda unit differing significantly from initial planning assumptions. Engine dimensions, cooling requirements, or mounting points apparently deviated enough to force a complete chassis rethink mid-development cycle. Serious work on the current AMR26 did not begin until April 2025, according to Newey's own timeline disclosure. That late start meant less validation time for such a fundamental architectural pivot. Every hour spent reworking basic packaging was an hour lost on aerodynamic refinement and correlation testing. The vibration issues we discussed earlier may themselves be symptoms of this forced integration rather than pure power unit flaws. Resonant frequencies emerge when components interact in unplanned ways within constrained spaces. A redesigned chassis tub with suboptimal stiffness characteristics could amplify engine harmonics rather than dampen them. The chicken and egg nature of these problems makes isolated fixes nearly impossible to validate quickly. Design changed, aerodynamics suffered. Correlation broke. The 3-5-second qualifying deficit represents the cumulative cost of these interconnected failures. Wind tunnel data presumably stopped matching track reality once the chassis architecture shifted. Engineers chasing false correlation signals waste weeks before recognizing the model itself is flawed. By then, development tokens and budget cap allocations have already been consumed on dead-end solutions. The team's ability to recover depends entirely on establishing accurate baseline measurements going forward. Without trustworthy simulation tools, every upgrade package becomes another expensive gamble. Newey acknowledged this maturity challenge directly when discussing the team's growth over the last 12 months. He stated they are now in a much better place to capitalize on regulation changes than a year ago. That optimism suggests the painful lessons of 2026 are being absorbed into organizational processes rather than repeated. Whether that institutional learning translates into immediate lap time remains the critical unanswered question heading into the second half of this championship campaign. Honda's Shintaro Orihara publicly admitted their Barcelona performance was definitely poor compared to other manufacturers. That candid assessment set the baseline expectation for everything that followed this season. Now, all eyes turn to Zandvoort, where a revised power unit makes its competitive debut. Reports indicate this update met Honda's internal targets during validation testing. Rumored gains span 20 to 50 horsepower depending on which paddock source you consult. No outlet has independently confirmed a precise figure despite extensive speculation. Internal targets might reflect conservative benchmarks established during the reliability crisis rather than true competitive parity. Hitting those goals represents necessary progress without guaranteeing championship relevance. The Dutch GP weekend will finally separate verified improvement from optimistic projection. Timing sheets against direct midfield rivals will provide the first concrete answer. Until then, we remain suspended between acknowledged failure and unverified hope.